Claude's death was a sad but poetic moment. On his deathbed, surrounded by Emma and a few close friends, he heard distant cannons and murmured, "This is the end." His legacy, however, is far from over. Musicians worldwide continue to perform his works, and his influence is felt in genres as diverse as jazz, film music, and experimental pop. If you've made it this far, here's your reward. The best books for musicians include Debussy, His Life and Mind by Edward Lockspizer, a detailed biography, The Cambridge Companion to Debussy, for understanding his context, and Music and the Exotic from the Renaissance to Mozart, for exploring exotic influences. These books will help you connect with music in a new and profound way. Subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss more stories about composers who changed the world. His relationship with Gabrielle Dupont was an emotional roller coaster. They lived in a small apartment surrounded by books and scores. Gabrielle was an independent woman, but Claude's infidelities and financial tensions wore down the relationship. When he met Emma Bardak, Claude was captivated by her elegance and love for music. Emma sang at social gatherings, and her voice enchanted him. But their affair had consequences. Friends like Satie temporarily distanced themselves, and Parisian society judged him harshly. With Emma, Claude found emotional stability, though he was never free from criticism. Chao-Chu, his daughter, was his joy. He wrote her affectionate letters and dedicated time to her despite his busy schedule. Once, he bought her a small toy piano, and she spent hours imitating her father. During the war, Claude felt powerless. Paris was dark, with constant fear of air raids. He wrote letters to friends expressing his frustration at not being able to compose as much as he wanted. Sometimes, he sat on his balcony, gazing at the night sky, seeking inspiration in the silence between bombardments. His illness forced him to rest more than he wanted, but his mind remained active. In 1916, he traveled to Biarritz on the Atlantic coast, seeking relief in the sea air. There, he wrote some of his final pieces inspired by the sound of the waves. Additional anecdotes add color to his life. Once, in a Parisian cafe, Claude argued with a music critic who called him a composer without structure. Claude replied, "Structure is for those who lack imagination." On another occasion, during a dinner, he refused to play the piano because he disliked performing under pressure. He loved cats and had one named Poussette that slept on his lap while he composed. When he traveled to London in 1900, he was struck by the foggy landscapes and Turner's paintings, which reminded him of the atmospheres he wanted to create in his music. In his teens, Claude was a slender young man with long hair and an intense gaze. He loved wandering through Paris, observing people in cafes and reading poetry in parks. During his time with Nadezhda von Meck, he lived as a member of the family, playing for her children and joining them on their travels. In Italy, he was struck by Florence's architecture but felt out of place among the wealthy Russian aristocrats. In Moscow, he heard Orthodox choirs and Russian folk music, which gave him new ideas about melodies and textures. When he returned to Paris, he carried a suitcase full of experiences that set him apart from his conservatory peers. In Rome, during his time at the Villa Medici, Claude was bored with the other students, whom he found rigid and unimaginative. He preferred walking through the gardens, reading Edgar Allan Poe, or writing letters to friends in Paris. Sometimes, he snuck out to listen to street musicians or visit ancient churches, where organs resonated with hymns. These experiences, though not directly related to his studies, fueled his imagination. When he returned to Paris, he settled in the Latin Quarter, a hub for artists, writers, and musicians. There, he met symbolist poets who invited him to their gatherings, where poetry was read and art was discussed. Mallarmé, in particular, became an important figure for Claude, encouraging him to explore music as a form of sonic poetry. He smoked heavily, which likely worsened his health, and had a fascination with exotic objects, like his collection of Japanese art. Claude died on March 25, 1918, in his Paris home, as German cannons rumbled in the distance. He was only 55 years old. His funeral was simple, held amid the war, with few attendees due to the chaos in the city. But the hardest blow came a year later, in 1919, when his daughter Chao-Chu, only 14 years old, died of diphtheria. It was a tragedy that marked the end of an era for the Debussy family. Emma, his wife, lived until 1934, carrying the memory of Claude and their daughter. Debussy's legacy is immense. He inspired composers like Maurice Ravel, Igor Stravinsky, and Bela Bartok, and his influence reached jazz, with musicians like Duke Ellington and Bill Evans admiring his use of harmonies. His friendships with poets like Mallarmé and musicians like Satie made him a central figure in symbolism and modernity. Though he disliked the term Impressionism, his music paved the way for genres like minimalism and film music. To expand this story, let's go back to his childhood. Claude grew up in a home where music wasn't a priority. His father wanted him to become a sailor, a more stable profession in an uncertain era. But Claude's mother, Victorine, noticed his interest in the piano and supported him, despite limited resources. In Cannes, during the war, Claude spent hours playing simple melodies, imitating what he heard. His Aunt Clementine, who lived in southern France, insisted he receive formal lessons. Without her intervention, Claude might never have discovered his talent. At the conservatory, he was an odd student. He arrived late, argued with teachers, and preferred improvising on the piano over following assigned scores. His peers saw him as eccentric but recognized his genius. Now, I'd like to pause for a moment to recommend something special. If you're passionate about classical music, you'll find links in the description to the best books for musicians, such as composer biographies and guides on musical impressionism. Buy them through my links. It doesn't cost you anything extra, but it helps me keep creating content about geniuses like Mozart, Beethoven, and Debussy. It's a simple way to support the channel and keep discovering these incredible stories. Check them out. You'll love them. During World War I, which began in 1914, Claude lived in a Paris under constant threat of bombardment. The city was tense, with sirens and nightly blackouts. Despite his illness, Claude kept working, though with difficulty. He traveled little, but when he did, it was to attend concerts or collaborate with artists. In 1911, he worked with poet Gabriel D'Annunzio on a theatrical piece, and in 1913, he collaborated with Diaghilev's Ballets Russes, a group revolutionizing dance and music. His life was full of contrasts. On one hand, his illness drained him. On the other, his mind kept searching for new forms of expression. Curious anecdotes paint a more human portrait of Claude. At 18, while traveling with Nadezhda von Meck, he indirectly met Tchaikovsky, arranging his pieces for four-hand piano. On another occasion, during a rehearsal, a conductor asked if one of his works depicted a storm at sea. Claude replied with his characteristic dry humor, "No, it's just the sea." He hated being called an impressionist. He preferred the term symbolist, as he felt his music evoked ideas and emotions rather than concrete images. He was a perfectionist to the extreme, revising his scores repeatedly in pursuit of perfection. He was also known for his bad temper during lessons. He didn't enjoy teaching, though he had students like Raoul Bardak. Claude's personal life was as intense as his music. In 1893, he began a passionate relationship with Gabrielle Dupont, a free-spirited woman who worked as a dressmaker. They lived together in a small Paris apartment, but the relationship was unstable. In 1894, Claude had a brief affair with Therese Roger, a singer, which caused a scandal in musical circles. The Parisian press was unkind, and Claude's reputation suffered. But then, in 1899, he married Rosalie Texier, known as Lily, a model with simple beauty. At first, they seemed happy, but the relationship deteriorated quickly. In 1904, Claude met Emma Bardak, a sophisticated woman, the wife of a banker and mother of Raoul Bardak, who would later become Claude's student. The attraction was instant, and they began an affair that shook Paris. Lily, devastated, attempted suicide by shooting herself in the chest. She survived, but the scandal was enormous. Friends and colleagues criticized Claude, and the press portrayed him as a cruel man. In 1905, Claude divorced Lily and married Emma. That same year, their daughter, Claude Emma, nicknamed Chao Chu, was born, becoming the center of his world. In 1908, Claude's life took another grim turn. He was diagnosed with colorectal cancer. The disease weakened him, but it didn't stop his creativity or his critical spirit. He wrote music reviews under the pseudonym Monsieur Crotch for magazines like La Revue Blanche and Gil Blas, where he defended French music and criticized musical conservatism. Despite the pain, he continued composing and attending cultural events. He collected Japanese art, kept a golden frog on his desk as an inspiration talisman, and read poets like Baudelaire and Poe, whose dark and evocative ideas resonated with him. Paris in the 1880s was a hotbed of new ideas. Symbolist poets like Stéphane Mallarmé and Paul Verlaine sought to capture emotions through imagery, while Impressionist painters like Claude Monet played with light and color. Claude was drawn to this world. He attended performances of Richard Wagner's operas, whose dense and emotional music initially impressed him. He traveled to Bayreuth, Germany in 1888 and 1889 to attend Wagnerian festivals, where he heard Tristan und Isolde and the Mastersingers of Nuremberg. But then, he became disillusioned with Wagner. He felt his music was too heavy, too German. He wanted to create something different, something that reflected French sensibility. Subtle, evocative, and free from rigid structures. In 1889, during the Paris Universal Exposition, Claude discovered Javanese gamelan music, with its pentatonic scales and hypnotic rhythms. That experience was like a lightning bolt for him, opening new possibilities for his music. That same year, he met Erik Satie, an eccentric composer who worked as a pianist in Parisian cafés. Satie, with his humor and rejection of conventions, became a key friend. He once told Claude, "You don't have to be afraid of being different." That phrase stuck with him. Claude traveled with them through France, Switzerland, Italy, and even Moscow, an experience that broadened his horizons. In Russia, he encountered the music of Tchaikovsky and other Slavic composers, whose colors and emotions contrasted with the rigidity of the French conservatory. During these travels, he composed arrangements of dances from Swan Lake and his own piano trio in G major, an early work that showcased his emerging talent. Subscribe if you enjoyed the video, as it helps me continue sharing stories about geniuses like Debussy who changed music forever. Back in Paris, Claude continued his studies at the conservatory, but his rebellious spirit often clashed with its rules. In 1884, at the age of 22, he achieved a major milestone. He won the Prix de Rome with his cantata L'Enfant Prodigue. This prestigious award allowed him to study at the Villa Medici in Rome from 1885 to 1887. It was a dream opportunity for any young musician, but Claude didn't enjoy his time there. The Villa Medici, with its strict rules and academic atmosphere, made him feel trapped. He preferred wandering the streets of Rome, reading poetry, or listening to music that inspired him, rather than meeting his teacher's expectations. Despite this, he composed several works during his stay, though many left him unsatisfied. He returned to Paris in 1887, ready to immerse himself in the city's vibrant cultural scene. At the age of 10, in 1872, Claude entered the Paris Conservatory, one of the most prestigious musical institutions in Europe. It wasn't an easy process. The conservatory was demanding, and Claude had to prove his talent in a competitive environment. There, he studied piano with Antoine-François Marmontel, a strict but respected teacher, and solfège with Albert Lavignac, who taught him to read scores with precision. He also took composition classes with Ernest Gouraud, harmony with Émile Durand, and organ with César Franck, a towering figure in French music. At first, Claude excelled. He won a Deuxième Accessit in 1874, a Premier Accessit in 1875, and a second Prix in 1877. But then, things got complicated. In 1878 and 1879, he failed to secure first place in piano, which disqualified him from continuing in that advanced specialty. Instead of giving up, he focused on harmony and composition, areas where his creativity began to shine. His teachers described him as a talented but rebellious student, with an arrogant attitude and a tendency to skip history or music theory classes. He wasn't interested in the conservatory's strict rules. He preferred to explore new ideas, listen to music not found in textbooks, and dream of sounds that didn't yet exist. In 1879, at the age of 17, Claude had his first professional experience outside the conservatory. He worked as a resident pianist at the Château de Chenonceau, a majestic mansion in the Loire Valley. There, he played for guests and began composing his first pieces, inspired by the romantic surroundings of the castle and the poetry of Alfred de Musset. But then, in 1880, an unexpected opportunity changed his life. Nadezhda von Meck, a wealthy Russian patron who supported Tchaikovsky, hired him as a pianist for her family. But then, in 1870, the Franco-Prussian War broke out, bringing chaos to France. Paris came under siege with bombardments and food shortages. Victorine, who was pregnant, decided to take 7-year-old Claude and his sister Adele to Cannes, in southern France, to escape the danger. There, in a calmer environment, Claude had his first encounter with music. His paternal aunt, Clementine Debussy, paid for piano lessons with an Italian musician named Jean Cerruti. Imagine a young boy, in the midst of a war, sitting at a piano, discovering the keys as a refuge from hardship. Those first lessons sparked a flame that would never go out. But then, the family's situation worsened. His father, Manuel, joined the Paris Commune in 1871, a revolutionary movement seeking to establish a socialist government after France's defeat in the war. The Commune was crushed, and Manuel was sentenced to 4 years in prison, though he only served 1. While in jail, he met Charles de Sivry, a musician whose mother, Antoinette Maute de Fleurville, was a talented pianist and a student of Frédéric Chopin. Antoinette saw potential in Claude and became his new teacher, guiding him toward a more serious path in music. Welcome to this fascinating journey through the life of Claude Debussy. The title, The Story of Debussy, promises to unravel the complete life of a genius who transformed classical music with his unique vision. Let's walk through his path, from a small village near Paris to the most prestigious stages in the world, passing through stormy romances, inspiring friendships, and a rebellious spirit that defied the norms of his time. Picture a story full of passion, conflicts, unexpected moments, and anecdotes that will make you feel like you personally know this French composer. Stay until the end, because I'll reveal a special reward. The best books for musicians that will inspire you to dive even deeper into the world of classical music. Get ready for an intimate narrative, as if we were chatting about a friend, with details that will captivate you from the very first moment. Claude Debussy, whose full name was Achille Claude Debussy, was born on August 22, 1862, in Saint-Germain-en-Laye, a quiet village about 20 kilometers northwest of Paris, France. It was a time of change in Europe. The Second French Empire, under Napoleon III, was experiencing an industrial boom, while art and music were searching for new forms of expression. His parents were humble people. His father, Manuel Achille Debussy, worked as a salesman in a porcelain shop, a business that failed and closed in 1864. His mother, Victorine Manoury, was a seamstress and took on the responsibility of supporting the family. Claude was the eldest of 5 siblings, and from a young age, life was tough for them. The family moved to Paris in search of better opportunities, first to Clichy, a modest suburb, and then to a small apartment on Rue Saint-Honoré, in the heart of the city. Life in Paris was not easy. The family lived on the bare minimum, and the streets of the capital were filled with noise, carriages, and the bustle of a growing city.